Good morning. Welcome to the Point. In Lansing, the state budget is dominating the conversation, or perhaps lack of conversation. Here's a brief timeline of what has been happening since the last week. On Friday the 6th, Senate Majority Leader Mike Shirkey released a statement that indicated Republicans in the legislature would proceed with a budget that was not tied to an agreement on road funding. The governor's 45-cent per gallon gas tax was never introduced in either body, and even some Democrats admitted the plan did not have support to pass. Later that day, the governor's office advised a news conference for Monday morning, presumably to talk about the budget and roads. By Sunday afternoon, that event had been canceled. Then, on Monday morning, a joint release from the governor, Senate Majority Leader, and Speaker of the House said that the leaders agreed to negotiate a budget while putting the issue of new road funding aside until the budget was done. Later that day, the governor told me she was, quote, being the adult in the room, trying to get a budget done. On Wednesday, the governor told me, quote, we're negotiating, I guess. That's a good sign, but we'll kind of see. Things can blow up on any given day, end quote. Apparently that was the day, because a short time later, a release from Senator Shirkey's office said talks had broken off and the governor had walked away from negotiations. On Thursday, the governor talked with reporters on the Capitol lawn to outline her objection to the legislature's actions.
I think it's confirmation that they're going to continue moving forward. They got to do what they got to do, and then I'm going to do what I got to do.
Is that a veto?
We'll see. You know, I'm hopeful that I get budgets on my desk that educate our kids, prioritize that, as well as closing the skills gap. These are things that are of critical importance to our economy, to our quality of life, and our ability to compete with the rest of the world. So I'll be scrutinizing them when they get to my desk. I introduced a budget 6 months ago with $2.5 billion in for roads. To come back and say we want to all of a sudden put some one-time money in does not fix the problem. In fact, it makes it more expensive to do the work because there's not the ability to plan. You have to all of a sudden ramp up. You know, this is the worst way to go about doing it. This is the exact kind of gimmick that got us in this problem in the first place. This phony game that we're fixing things with one-time money is just, it's not going to cut it. I've told the public, I'm going to be honest about the size of the problem, and I'm going to work to have real solutions. They are not serious about fixing the roads. They are not serious about negotiating budgets, and now we'll see where this leads. We have a $2.5 billion problem. The only new dollars they put on the table in any discussion was $300 million of unnamed taxes that they were supposedly going to raise. $300 million. About $2.5 billion problem we have. That's 35 miles of a 4-lane road. That's a joke. They're not serious. They never came to the table with a serious intention of fixing the roads, and that's why we had to take roads out of the conversation, which they agreed to, and then an hour later they say they want one-time money for roads, a pittance of what we really need. They're not serious, and when the roads are up next spring, if we don't have a solution after this budget gets done, you're going to have to blame the Republican Party for it.
At almost the same time, I sat down with Senate Majority Leader Shirkey to get his perspective of budget negotiations. Senator, I'm going to start by saying that this is Thursday midday. I do that because most of this interview will be for our Sunday show.
Oh, okay.
But between now and then, some of what we discuss may change. This is kind of a moving target. But as of this moment, tell me what you can in terms of budgeting for the state. I know you and your caucus and the House are moving forward with budget bills. Mm-hmm. But as of this moment, it would appear that conversations with the governor are not continuing. Is that a fair assessment?
That's a fair assessment right now, but this is a very fluid process. And I'm a big believer, Rick, in that the notion that, all complex deals generally live and die 3 times before they come to final life. And so I still hold out hope that we'll have further conversations. But right now, because we're getting close to the end of the constitutional requirement for completing a budget, we have no choice but to move forward in a very methodical, purposeful way, which is exactly what we're going to do.
I don't expect you to negotiate the budget with the governor through me on this show, but can you categorize what led to the separation of those talks? Because here's kind of the timeline from afar that I got. Mm-hmm. Friday, a week ago Friday, right. You issued a statement saying you're going to move ahead with the budget because the time is running out. Governor called a press conference for Monday morning, then canceled it on Sunday. Then there was the joint release that you all were going to work together towards a budget. That was on Monday. talked to the governor on Monday afternoon, and she was on board. And then by Wednesday, you weren't talking again. So was there an issue? Is there a particular thing, or is it everything?
No, it's not everything. Actually, it's quite simple, and in my words, astounding. That what we're really arguing about is what we've been doing for the last few budget cycles, and that is putting as much money as we can into roads from our operating budget. And we had proposed a decent number there, kind of consistent with what we've been doing over the last few years. And she balked at that. My governor balked at that, thinking that that was outside of our agreement, which is not the case. We agreed to set aside long-term road funding. And I am completely committed to re-engaging in that conversation as soon as the budget's over with, because I still believe we are obligated to do so and come up with a long-term funding plan. But right now, we're arguing over one-time funding in this budget. So it's a bit astounding to me that we'd be talking about threatening problems in the budget process over spending money on roads.
When you talk to your caucus, and when you talk with the speaker, is it your intention to move forward with a budget without regard to whether or not you believe she'll sign it?
Yeah, we have to. We have a constitutional obligation. We can't let a single entity interrupt our, frankly, constitutional requirement to submit. We've already passed budgets. Both chambers have passed budgets. You know, this notion that we haven't been working. We passed budgets, 3 months ago, 4 months ago. But we have to move forward, because that is it's our number one obligation for the Constitution, is to get a budget done by the end of September. And we can't hold back on that in fear of what somebody else might do.
So talk to me a little bit about the way those budgets might look, and I know you still have conference to go
Right.
through, but in general, let's talk about roads. What does that look like under your plan if those go through?
We're fulfilling the 2015 law that requires us to allocate, funding to roads. Plus, we found by reprioritizing current spending another $500 million to put towards roads. That's really the difference in the essence of the transportation package, is that item right there.
What under your plan would education look like?
Our budget proposal that will be passed out of conference committee is less than a 0.008% difference from what the governor proposed. Now, there are some differences in how it's distributed, but in total dollars, it's almost immeasurable, the difference. So to me, again, there's some subtle differences on distribution, but the total dollars, for all intents and purposes, is the same. And so I, again, would be mystified if that became a point of contention.
Again, and I'm being a little cautious because I appreciate the fact that some conversations necessarily remain conversations between those interested parties. But I guess I'm a little confused if these numbers are that close. And again, I'll point out that we're talking on Thursday, and by Sunday morning, there may be some differences, either subtle or considerable.
From your lips to God's ears.
But is there a good prospect, I know you're optimistic, but is there a good prospect that you all can get together, agree upon something, even make some subtle changes already in what you have done to get the governor on board?
There's no closed for business sign on my office wall or on my office door. And if we want to re-engage and talk about true, sincere negotiation, happy to do so. Meanwhile, we can't just wait for that possibility. We have to move forward.
When this process started back in March, started before that, of course, but after revenue estimating and some of those things took place, the governor rolled out her proposals in March. You started working on budgets. Somewhere in between March and May, you and the speaker and the governor and your members all came together and agreed on an auto no-fault insurance package. Something that I had cynically said would not happen because it hadn't for 30 plus years.
Right.
I was relying on history, not thinking that new eyes might take a look at it, have an opportunity, which you did. I don't make judgment on policy, but I will make a judgment that it was a pretty amazing feat that you were able to get some change to auto no-fault insurance. Between then and now, how would you characterize the relationship between the quadrant? Have you guys continued to meet, continued to have conversations?
Yeah, we've had a lot of recent meetings. We've even had some whiteboard meetings, what-ifing different scenarios. But we really, we ran out of a bit of time. We couldn't resolve the biggest differences on a roads package. And so, like I said a moment ago, I'm glad that we decided to separate the two. And I'm happy to get re-engaged when the budget is completed. But right now, we got to get a budget done.
So as we sit and talk, there are 2.5 weeks thereabouts before you've got to get something to the governor. And by the way, she has to sign it, and that's not just a simple matter. I mean, she'll have to go through it. If she decides she has the ability to go through and line item veto some things, which I think virtually every governor has done. So it isn't a matter of just giving it to her on the 30th. I mean, you've got to get this to her by
she'll have it well in advance of that, more likely a week before the 30th, in that neighborhood.
All right. So as we continue to watch that, let me ask you some hypothetical questions, which politicians hate, and I don't blame you, but I got to ask them anyway. When you think about road funding, the governor's asked for $2.5 billion. About $600 million of that would have gone to backfill some education money. So about $1.9 billion. There are ideas that have floated all over the place for moving the tax at the pump into all roads, even a proposal perhaps to raise the sales tax by a percentage point. Are there enough, you can comment on any of those if you care to, but are there enough other ways to find revenue that you could come up with near the money that she was asking for in the 45 cent per gallon gas tax that I presume is simply not going to be able to get enough votes?
I will tell you to it this way. We gave her a couple of proposals, fully detailed, that got to nearly 90% of what her budget proposal was for roads. So
90% of the 1.9.
The 1.8, 1.9, that's right. And all executable. And but I'm going to just repeat what her response has been on most of them, and that is that's good, but it's not enough new revenue. I was always operating under the opinion that what we're trying to do is find new revenue for roads, not just new revenue. And that, frankly, is where the difference is.
So, to be clear, so people understand, you and the House both have come up with different ways of moving existing revenue, or revenue that's already coming into the state, and putting it into the roads. And the governor has said from the beginning that she wanted new revenue. I mean, her plan was to generate all new revenue with the 45 cent gas tax, and that's the biggest difference.
$2.5 billion of new revenue. And we've showed her ways to achieve most of what she's trying to accomplish with the roads without doing that. I got to be very careful, though, in saying that the concepts that we put in front of her were things that both the speaker and I thought we could get done in the chambers. We never voted on them and so forth. And so they weren't foregone conclusions. They were our best efforts to try to present some things that if she gave us the green light that, yeah, we can probably live with something like that, we'll go back and put our full shoulder into it. But we never even got that far.
So now the legislature appears poised to pass a budget that is not negotiated with the governor. That then leaves the governor the option to sign it, veto it, or use her line item veto power and eliminate spending she finds objectionable. If, as the senator suggests, the legislature delivers the budget sometime the week of the 23rd, that would give the governor a week or so to decide what she will do. A full veto would almost inevitably lead to a partial government shutdown, and if history serves as a roadmap for what is to come, create a greater division between the Democrats and Republicans in Lansing, making finding a budget compromise even more difficult. We'll continue to follow this very fluid situation. When we come back, more on the budget and other priorities from a first-term senator from the east side of the state. To the point. Welcome back to the Point. Senator Stephanie Chang is in her first term and serving as the minority floor leader. We talked with her about the budget, of course, and other priorities she hopes to tackle. But first, a bit about the freshman senator. Senator, thank you for doing this. I want to start by having you introduce yourself, your district a little bit to our viewers. This is the first time on the show, and thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. So I'm excited to be here. I serve in the Senate in the 1st District, which includes a really big portion of Detroit, a lot of the east side, some of southwest Detroit, and a lot of downriver, so all along the Detroit River, everywhere down to Gibraltar. So it's a really amazing district. Before I served in the legislature, I worked as a community organizer on a whole host of social justice issues. And then in 2014, my then state representative, Rashida Tlaib, encouraged me to consider running to replace her in the legislature, in the state house. And it's been a whirlwind since.
You came into the Senate at a time when Democrats made the biggest pickup since the Watergate era, and so you end up being in a different situation than many Democrats who have come before you in the Senate. What is the change from your perspective from the House to the Senate? I get it, being in the minority in both, but in the Senate, it's a smaller group and you've got bigger numbers than you've had in a long time.
Yeah, I mean, we're so proud of the work that we did last year to be able to have 16 Democratic senators, and also, I should say, historic in that we have 8 women and 8 men, so gender parity for the first time, and it's very exciting. There's, I think, some interesting differences between the House and the Senate. I love serving in the Senate so far. Having a smaller body lends itself to building stronger relationships with a bigger proportion of the chamber, and I would like to say that we're a little bit, we like to keep things calmer and moving forward in a productive way, and I really enjoyed my time in the House. I do miss some of my House colleagues, but we're really happy to be in the Senate and to be able to have the opportunity to keep working on issues that really matter.
You have the advantage of having worked on budgets in the past from your position in the House, and we know it's a different day with divided government here. And I should point out, as I did in my other segment, that we're talking on Thursday midday, and by Sunday morning when this airs, things could have changed precipitously.
Yeah.
But as it is right now, the governor and the Republican leaders don't seem to be having a lot of dialogue. The budget process continues in both chambers, but without the buy-in from the administration, we don't know where that ends up. It could, I suspect, could end up with a whole lot of line item vetoes, or I guess it could end up with a total veto. What's your sense of where the budget is, and how concerned are you about the lateness of the hour?
I mean, the reality is that, it's mid-September. The majority party and both sides, honestly, have had months to work on a deal and come to some consensus, and unfortunately that work didn't happen when it should have, and so I'm obviously a little disappointed in that process, but I think we are where we are right now. I think that everyone is among our Senate Democratic caucus is going to work hard to make sure that we're really just focused on making sure that our budget includes priorities like our water, like funding education, like like our roads, and making sure that we are really moving forward. This is too important to not get it right. And our colleagues, I think we're just going to keep working hard and seeing what we can get done. Although a couple weeks seems like a short amount of time, a lot can happen. So we're eager to keep moving forward.
Well, and I guess it would be, I would be remiss if I didn't point out that all of the bills have already moved. So if there is a consensus to be gained with leadership in the government, all they have to do is substitute out those numbers, right?
Yep. So we're at the point now where we've got conference committees, which is basically, for those that are unfamiliar, the House and the Senate come together in a smaller committee to be able to sort of hash out the disagreements between the chambers. And so, we've got a lot of smart people around here, a lot of really good ideas, and for me, I think what's most important is that we stay focused again on what matters most to Michigan families, our air and our water, making sure our kids get good education, and that we're funding appropriately. So we're going to keep working towards those values, and I remain always optimistic.
I'm going to give the viewers a break, and we're not going to talk about the budget anymore. We've been talking about that a lot, but I am interested in one of what I perceive as one of your real passions. You talked about it just now, and that's air quality, water quality, and those are things that obviously are important. From our perspective in West Michigan, we've been dealing with PFAS over the past, we've been dealing with it for a long time, but been more aware of it in the past couple of years. But you're also working on air quality issues, and you had some interesting comparisons between your district on as far east as you can get, and we're about as far west as you can get, but there are some similarities.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, so just by way of background, the district that I represented in the House in particular included a lot of, almost all of Southwest Detroit, where it was just a lot of heavy industry, and also an international truck traffic sort of haven, right? Because we got the Ambassador Bridge as well as the tunnel. So we have a lot of air pollution in the area, and so these are things that actually can be addressed. So I've been working on air quality issues for some time now, after hearing from so many people about asthma and COPD and various respiratory illnesses that are much more common in the areas where there's a lot of air pollution. But I also have been learning about the parallels between Southeast Michigan and west side of the state. The Michigan Environmental Justice Coalition put out a report a few weeks ago in relation to environmental justice hotspots and looking at 10 census tracts across our state who have the most environmental injustice, and actually Kent County had 5 of those top 10 census tracts. So, it's something that I'm going to dig into more. But air quality is a big concern of mine because ultimately we need to make sure that people's public health is protected.
One of the problems with that is it's a slow turnaround, right? Because you talked about those businesses in your old House district, and they have been there for decades. Mm-hmm. So to change that process, what is your approach? Do you start by encouraging or first developing best practices? Do you start by trying to legislate some of those? How do you start to affect a big change that could come with a big price tag too?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a number of things that can happen. For me as a legislator, I've introduced over a half dozen bills related to air quality, and looking at the way that our state does permitting, and also looking at how do we consider cumulative impact. That's something that we really have not done a very good job of. And cumulative impact is really looking at not just pollutant by pollutant by pollutant and company by company by company, but really looking at how this all works together. And because when we have areas where there's 30 plus air pollution sources in one geographic area, we need to be considering all of that together. So there are good policies that we could actually enact to look at cumulative impact. One of the things that I also I'm proud to continue to work on is legislation that would make sure that the fines that polluters pay actually come back to the communities that are affected in the way of air monitors and health impact studies and vegetative buffers, which is basically trees and shrubs to help clean up the air. So there's a lot of good things that we can do, but we have to make it a priority. And I think that's really important, especially because we're talking about people's health.
So what lies ahead for Senator Chang and her colleagues? Well, it's likely to be dominated by the budget for the next few weeks. Conference committees between the House and Senate will churn out spending bills and likely have a finished product late next week or early the next. In the meantime, Republican lawmakers are headed to a biannual event that brings big names to Michigan in advance of the next general election. A note about Mackinac when we return to The Point. Every 2 years, the Michigan Republican Party holds what they call the Republican Leadership Conference on Mackinac Island. The biannual kickoff for the next election cycle typically features big political names from around the nation. This year, as Michigan Republicans prepare for both state and U.S. House races as well as a U.S. Senate race, Vice President Mike Pence and Republican House Leader Kevin McCarthy will be in attendance. But expect a good deal of the conversation to center around the state budget. Even if the legislature delivers a spending plan before the conference, it's sure to be the subject of a lot of speculation and second guessing. And we'll bring you our show from the island next Sunday morning. I hope you'll join us then and every Sunday at 10 a.m. for To The Point.